day. I am Richard S. McGee, and you are watching The Learning Tree. I have with me today Phyllis Barajas, who is the CEO, founder and CEO of an organization known as Conexion. That's spelled Conexion, unlike the way you would spell it out there. How are you today, Phyllis?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good.
I'm glad to have you here.
Glad
We're
to be
going to
here.
talk about Hispanic heritage. We missed the month. That was last month, right?
Well, it's actually from September 15th to October 15th.
Oh,
so
is it?
We're still a little bit on the margins of the window of Hispanic heritage. And actually, the reason for it being September 15th to October 15th is many Latin American countries celebrate their independence somewhere in between those dates. So it's a way to capture the many countries that represent the Hispanic heritage of people here in the United States.
All right, let's do some definitions first before we go anywhere. There's Hispanic, there's Latino, and Chicano.
Yeah.
What are the distinguishing difference between those
I
names?
use the term Hispanic Latino as a compound word simply because the word Hispanic was created by the U.S. Census for purposes of counting people. And the word Latino predated that. The word Chicano is more relevant to people of Mexican heritage like myself, and it tends to not be used very much around here because there are very few people of Mexican heritage here in the metropolitan area.
All right.
So what I use is Hispanic Latino, and then what I say to folks is it's always a good idea to ask the person to whom you're speaking, how do they wish to be identified? And some people are going to use a hyphenated Mexican American or Dominican without any hyphen, and some people will, so it's best to ask the person to whom you're speaking what is in fact the appropriate term to use in their particular situation.
Well, how about Latino?
Well, I use it as a compound word, Hispanic Latino. I don't differentiate.
But doesn't it define certain?
It does, and again, it's one of those things, how I define it might be different than somebody else in the audience who's defining it, so that's why I always defer to
I thought it would define those who came from Latin American countries.
Latin American countries, yes. In terms of if you were to be speaking to somebody, I always recommend that people just say, how would you like to be identified, Hispanic Latino or something else, and just ask them.
And Hispanic is the compound of...
I use Hispanic Latino. That's a way I particularly address this question because it does come up, and then you can go on from there because it's not, for me, it's not a very relevant term for me.
Is that right?
It's sort of an external label, so it doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning for me.
But the U.S. government lumps all of these under the one heading of Hispanic.
Correct. There's about 23 countries in Latin America, and so people are from all different countries with different histories, with different reasons for being in the United States, and so...
Give me an example of some of the countries in Latin America.
Well, Costa Rica, Mexico, Central America's Honduras, etc., Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, Ecuador, Bolivia. We can go on and on from there. But
where are there Hispanic other than Latin American countries?
Well, people, you always defer to the person to whom you're speaking, but you could include people from Spain. My name is Barajas. It is a Spanish origin. The airport in Madrid is Barajas Airport. So, but some people who are of Spanish origin may not think of themselves as Hispanic Latino. So again, I just would defer to whomever you're speaking. So anyway.
So now, tell me, when did this migration we'll continue to use the word Hispanic, of Hispanics decide to come to America? When did this happen?
I mean, it's been
What's the background?
It's been over the 20th century predominantly, and to this day there's still immigration occurring. There have been some spikes around the 1920s, and then again around 1972 when there was a increase in migration from Latin America from 1972 to the present. Although in the last few years that flow of immigration has slowed considerably. So we're not seeing the same level of immigration. And in fact, when we talk more about demographics now in 2016, the primary representation of Hispanics is actually coming from native-born versus immigrants.
I understand there are about 12 million Hispanics in the country. Is that correct? That sound
Well,
right?
actually, no, 50. It's more like 50 million.
50 million.
Right.
Oh, the 12 million are the undocumented.
11 million are undocumented. Yes.
Right. And where did the majority of Hispanics come from?
Well, they come from all over. Right now in the United States, about 60% of the people who identify as Hispanic in the United States are of Mexican origin.
Okay.
And then the other groups tend to be, and of course Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens because Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, and then other groups follow after that in terms of percentages, but those are probably the larger subgroups.
What's the migration per year?
I don't know what the migration is per year. I just know off the top of my head, I know that the immigration has declined over time and that the predominant source is now from native births. So, for example, in the last census, the 2010 census, the United States would have lost population had it not been for the Hispanic population. And most of that growth was through births as opposed to immigration. So the Hispanic Latino population enabled the United States to maintain its current level of population, and that occurred primarily through people already here in the United States and those having children.
And what states are the largest numbers of Hispanics?
Well, right now the largest are currently California and Texas. However, states that are growing significantly in terms of the fastest growing states in the Latino populations since 2000 are South Dakota, Tennessee.
How many Hispanics in South Dakota?
Well,
that's an interesting place to go.
Right, percent change 190%. Now, granted, South Dakota isn't a very populous state to begin with. I'm from Nebraska, so I know. But in terms of that, in 2000 there were 10,000 Hispanic Latinos, and in 2014 there were 29,000 Latinos. But some of the places where you're seeing a much larger growth in terms of numbers are states like North Carolina and Virginia. They're seeing a significant growth in Hispanic Latinos from 2000 to 2010. You're also seeing places like Arkansas and Alabama. So Arkansas saw from 2000, 85,000 Latinos. In 2010, 2005 Latinos. So 141% change in population. And in the state of Alabama, from 2000 to 2014, it increased by 164%. So the growth of the Hispanic Latino population is really throughout the United States, and in some areas more than others. So it's predicted by the U.S. Census by 2043, the United States will become a multicultural country, meaning that no one group will be 50% of the population. And what they project, the U.S. Census projects by 2043, the white non-Hispanic population will drop below 50% for the first time in the history of
2043.
2043.
I'll be around, won't you?
Yeah, I hope so. And the other thing that's interesting about that number is by 2043, the Hispanic population being the youngest, having the most women in the childbearing years, will represent the second largest group in the United States. So it'll be 2043 white.
Second largest or second largest minority group?
Second largest group, Hispanic Latinos, because they're white, black, they identify as white or black, as you know. So as a group, the Hispanic Latino population will be the second largest in the year 2043. You may or may not be aware of this, or you might be aware of this, but actually the Boston metropolitan area is now a majority minority city. And the white non-Hispanic population has dropped below 50% here in the Boston metropolitan area. It's down to 47%. Now, for the first time in the history of Boston, the white non-Hispanic population has dropped below 50%. And black, Asian, and Latinos make up the balance of the population. Latinos are currently about 18% of the population in the metropolitan Boston area, but right in Boston proper. Blacks are a little bit lower, I think around 16%, and I forget what the percent is of Asians. But when you put all that together, clearly the composition of the city is changing significantly, which is very consistent with what the U.S. Census predicts will happen in 2043 as a country. Will be much more diverse.
How are they politically?
Politically, it's interesting. When I first came to Massachusetts back in the late 80s, 89, 88, 89. I got politically involved at that time. I'm not as active as I was, but at that time I was co-chair of the Hispanic Latino Committee of the State Democratic Party.
Okay.
And I was active then. And at the time, one of the things that we focused on was voter registration, getting the vote out. And my observation then is the same thing that's true now, and that is that we need to take Hispanic Latinos more seriously. We seem to take it for granted that they're going to vote Democratic. That's not necessarily true. And I said then, and I said it now, I said it during the last presidential campaign, that Latinos are diverse culturally and by values as well. So some of the things that are Democratic values, inclusion, we tend to be more accepting of alternative family styles, different types of families, and so forth, that, and we're very hardworking, of course, and loyal, that for many Latinos, some of those things, as we've gotten to the 21st century, for some more conservative, there are conservative Hispanic Latinos that Republicans sometimes have recognized that difference and have started to try to cultivate the Hispanic Latino demographic as part of their constituents. And my concern is always that Democrats don't take Hispanic Latinos for granted, that we do get out there and we do ask them for their vote and really try to involve them. And then on the flip side, I believe on the flip side, as a member of that community, I do everything that I can to encourage people to go out and vote, register to vote. I've written a couple of articles about the importance of voting, because sometimes people will say to me, they'll say, well, my vote doesn't matter. I said, it doesn't matter if you don't show up.
That's right.
But the numbers are there. We have the numbers, and we could be within this country. So when Obama was elected, and certainly during this campaign, we have the potential to make a significant difference in the outcome if we show up. If we showed up in the numbers of registered voters that are out there who happen to be Hispanic Latino, we could make a huge, huge impact on the outcome of the election.
How are they going to go for this election?
I hope and pray that they will go Democratic. That's my hope. I believe that the candidate on the Democratic side represents values and approaches to making America and maintaining our position as world leaders. I think that that candidate has the best approach. I think the other candidate, his approach is more divisive, and it's very hard to build greatness on a divided foundation. So I believe that the Democratic candidate has a better platform with regard to not just Hispanic Latinos, but the country as a whole. So I think around education, around civil rights and so forth, I think the Democratic agenda is, in fact, a better agenda for our country as the country becomes more diverse.
How do most Hispanics make their living?
Well, ironically, I actually have that information here on my report as well. They tend to be in service industries.
Okay.
So they tend to be in service industries, and then they also 27% are in the service industries. We also have Latinos in professional positions, executive positions, about 17%. About 2% are in agriculture, which people assume. There was a survey done by the Pew Foundation, and when they asked people, what do Hispanics do? An overwhelming percentage of the people who respond to that question assumed that they were in agriculture, which they are in agriculture, but not overwhelmingly in agriculture. So they're really across industries.
In what manner are they in agriculture?
Well, I mean,
as employees,
as
or
employees,
oh,
yes, yeah.
okay.
I mean, agriculture as an industry
like
has
the
become
fruit pickers in California.
Correct,
Right.
I mean, agriculture is held in a few hands by huge companies now. Again, being from Nebraska, that's been a huge change. So anyway, but no, we're represented across industries, and again, that's something that's the stereotype of being in agriculture is a stereotype. So again, we tend to not be as visible, apparently, in, like a lot of the clients that I work with, I work with corporate clients. They're usually they have very little representation because they said we can't find any Hispanic.
They have what?
They can't find any Hispanic Latino
No.
candidates.
Okay.
So my argument is always, well, it depends on where you're looking, if you can find them or not find them. But
Yeah.
anyway, but we're out there. We're out there across industries.
How about in entrepreneurship? How about businesses? Are there?
Right.
What's the relationship of Hispanics to business, owned businesses?
Right. Well, interestingly enough, Latinos represent the highest percentage of entrepreneurs in the United States. Again, not surprising if you stop and think that immigrants tend to become entrepreneurs because they have fewer opportunities, so they frequently will start their own business. My dad is a good example of that. He came from Mexico. He was a migrant worker. He worked in the packing industries of Omaha, Nebraska before they were mechanized. And he got into construction and then started his own construction company and also bought real estate. So he's an example of what people
And what
do.
kind of industries do they tend to?
Excuse me.
That's
Sorry.
okay. That's fine. Do Hispanics tend to follow what kind of industries?
They can be across all industries. I mean, here in Massachusetts, I know a gentleman who runs a supply chain company. He's one of the largest Hispanic-owned businesses here in Massachusetts. It's supply chain company. They tend to be, in obviously in retail operations, in different types of supply chain companies and so forth. So they tend to be across all industries.
I see you have some breakdowns here of the Boston. Talk about Boston and this. For instance, you hear Boston has a population of 52% in East Boston.
Right. So what I was sharing with you earlier is that here in Massachusetts we're seeing the same phenomena that's happening nationally. So while Boston is now 47% white, non-Hispanic, East Boston is 52% Hispanic Latino.
Wait a minute now. Why do you break East Boston out? It's the same metropolitan area.
Well,
geographic area.
I did that because it's a distinct neighborhood and has certain boundaries, and it is 52. It is now heavily Hispanic, and it's part of the overall Boston.
What towns
footprint.
are we talking about?
I mentioned East Boston, which is East Boston.
Yeah, what towns though in East Boston?
East Boston is its own neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All
I
right.
mentioned Lawrence as another part of Massachusetts, not Boston, but of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Lawrence is 74% Hispanic
I
Latino.
know that's very high.
And the school population in Lawrence is 91% Hispanic Latino. So again, you can start doing the calculation about what the state of Massachusetts is going to be in the not too distant future when you look at the workforce. My hope, of course, and that's why I started my organization, is that we do a better job of connecting with one another so that we can do all that we can to prepare the next wave of young people to enter the workforce as those of us that are working now age out and retire, that the folks coming up, which we're increasingly will be Hispanic Latinos, will be prepared to take their place within business and government and education.
Let's talk a little bit about the undocumented. How do we work with that situation of the undocumented?
Well, I think the undocumented phenomena, which people forget, the United States has historically always had an immigrant population, and our laws or our rules, if you will, around people entering the United States have changed since the founding fathers. So how people came into the United States. They came over on a boat, got off the boat, and I don't think there was anybody here asking them to fill out any papers until Ellis Island, maybe.
Usually from Eastern Europe. And
so forth, among other places. And of course, we had the slave trade, which were involuntary immigrants as well from various places. And so what I think we forget is that coming into the 20th century, and even before the 20th century, looking back into the 19th century and so forth, our country has historically relied on cheap immigrant labor to do the most onerous jobs. So building the railroads was the Chinese immigrant.
Right.
We didn't care. We didn't care about safety. We didn't care how backbreaking it was. It was all manual labor. We didn't care because they were immigrants and we knew that they had few alternatives except to accept those kinds of jobs. When you look at, I go to New York City.
They didn't have status.
They did, clearly their status was quite low. When you look at the Brooklyn Bridge, when I go to New York City, I always think about the Irish immigrants who helped build the Brooklyn Bridge. And again, we didn't have safety standards like we do now. And I often think about how many Irish immigrants were hurt or killed as a result of working on the Brooklyn Bridge. And again, there was little attention paid to the implications of the poor working conditions that they experienced because they were immigrants, whether they were here with papers or undocumented. Again, it didn't matter. So our economy has always relied on a certain percentage of the labor being done by people that are working either under the table, without papers. And when you look at, when I go to Whole Foods and I buy my organic food, there are certain things like strawberries and so forth that have to be hand-picked. It's back-breaking work. And once again, who are you going to hire to do that type of back-breaking work? We rely on frequently people that are at the lowest end of the, the labor continuum, who are either, they could be, legal or undocumented immigrants, but they're people who have few alternatives, and so we rely on that. The poultry industry relies on people to do some of the most onerous jobs. Construction, when you look at North Carolina, working, and my son used to live there, and in the summer it is incredibly hot and humid.
How did he like living in North Carolina?
He liked it okay, but he came back up here because we're all here. So
my suspicion is that a lot of Hispanics go south because it's kind of like the climate in the country from which they came. Is that?
I think it's more proximity. So you look at Texas and California, it's proximity. Then you also look.
Well, North Carolina and South Carolina and Arkansas and.
Right. North Dakota is pretty cold.
That's pretty way out.
So keep in mind, I think people are going where there's a need. And one of the things I always remind people when they talk about, I was talking to somebody this weekend, and they were saying, well, yeah, but we have laws about how you enter the country. I said, we actually are looking at the wrong end of the continuum. The reason people find work here is because somebody's willing to hire them. The employers know what the rules are, and they choose to overlook the rules because, for whatever reason, it's of benefit to them as an employer.
Cheap wages.
All right. So I think sometimes we're going after the wrong end of the continuum when we say we're going to deport people. Well, what's going to happen to those employers who have relied on those individuals?
Nothing.
Right.
So no penalties.
Well, the penalty will be that they're going to be. A number of years ago, there was a situation where there's been spikes where we come down hard on immigration, and the agricultural business in Washington State that relies on hand picking experienced a real drop in workers because people were afraid and so didn't show up for the apple picking season. And so their crops sat there. They were trying to find out who else would pick their apples. So we forget that there's an economic imperative. I believe if employers in this country were really serious about reforming the immigration, we would do it. But there's an economic indicator that we frequently don't acknowledge, that these employers know the rules, they know what they're supposed to do, and they choose not to for all kinds of reasons. So why are you going after the undocumented when the employers are the ones that are going to be questioning, well, what am I going to do now? You've just taken away my workers. And they're going to have to pay more or do something to replace those workers.
What are your thoughts on reform of the...
Well, just what I said. I think reform will come when employers...
What kind of reform? What would you advocate for?
Well, I think there could be a number of things. I mean, this isn't the first time this has come up. So back in the 30s, the Braceros program, there was a program back in the 30s, again, when the United States needed labor, and needed labor to do the really hard stuff, back-breaking work. We did have a program that allowed people to come across the border for the purposes of working and then go back and forth. So we've done that in the past. I'm not sure why that practice stopped, but we've done it in the past. We also have the dreamers, people who came here as children through no fault of their own, or were born here and their parents were not, and maybe undocumented. I think that we are in a position, we grandfather people in all the time for all kinds of reasons. In other situations, I think we need to look at some.
You don't think we should be deporting people en masse?
I think that would be, as I said, if you stop and think about, go to restaurants, go to farms, go to businesses, go to the garment district in New York City. There are a lot of places that rely on immigrant labor, and I think that deporting people en masse would be problematic for those businesses, and I really feel they should own up to what they're doing, and they should be part of this conversation about what would make sense, because we talk about, well, we're going to deport them because they're criminals or whatever people say. Very few crimes are committed by undocumented workers or immigrants, period, because they're trying to make it in the United States. They're very appreciative of being here from whatever country they're from, whether they're from Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East. They came here. I mean, I always say to people, what would it take for you, stop and think for a minute, the way we vilify immigrants from whatever, Muslim, wherever they're from, what would it take for you to be in such dire circumstances that you would leave everything you know, your language, your food, your family, your home, everything, and take the risk of leaving to go somewhere else, where you know you may or may not, you may not make the trip, you might drown, you might get picked up and shipped back to wherever you're from, you might get locked up in some detention center and God knows where, all the horrible things that could happen. How difficult would your life have to be for you to actually take that step, pack up your few belongings that you can carry with whatever money you have, and leave with the idea that you may never come back? Think about it for just a moment, just sit for 60 seconds, close your eyes, and I would encourage your viewers to do this and think about what in the name of God would it take for you to do that, and then ask the question. Most of the immigrants that are here from wherever they are, documented or undocumented, they're law-abiding. They tend to stay under the radar screen. They don't want to get in trouble. They just want to make a better life for themselves and their loved ones. And so for us to think about deporting people en masse is, I think, very...
You're ludicrous.
It is. It's like we're not talking to the business community who relies on that labor. Not that I think they should exploit people. However, they're not part of this. We're not owning up to the fact that we use people that way. And then on the immigrant side,
why do you think the people that use this labor force don't come forward and at least have a voice in the conversation?
Because they'd have to be admitting to breaking the law. I mean, if they're not checking your. I used to be in human resources for different companies. When you hire somebody, you have a form that you tell your employee to fill out, and you say to the employee, and bring the following documents: a photo ID, et cetera, et cetera. This is not new. We have forms, so there's no reason that an employer would be hiring anybody without the proper forms. We know what we're supposed to do. There's a checklist. This is not a secret. So any employer who's hiring people who they have not adequately vetted is on them. So I mean, they're not stepping forward because they know that they have circumvented the law.
So that's why they don't join the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, why would they? I mean, they'd have to own it. Well, yeah, I hired a bunch of undocumented people. I mean, one of the presidential candidates, one of his factories uses they found that they had undocumented or something, and you know, they did it, and you know, I don't know how they got out of that one, but you know, clearly they knew better, but they chose to use them because it's cheap labor.
So you have a how about giving citizenship to undocumented? That subject is a very hot issue in the campaign. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a very complicated issue. So as I said, I think people who are dreamers, certainly we need to look at those because you know they're here, they were born here. Through all intents and purposes, this is the only country they know. I think people who came as adults, we need to look at what are the circumstances, how are they contributing to society, because they are contributing in terms of their working and so forth. So I think there's probably a way to do this, and there may be some people for whom we really aren't going to find a good rationale for allowing them to stay. We may have to say, you know what, in your circumstance, we're going to have to ask you to go back to wherever and find a way to come back legally. That said, keep in mind that some of these people are coming from countries in Latin America, Central America, where there's a lot of political unrest, and people are, as you know, the FARC, we had hoped that there was going to be a peace agreement in Colombia, and that fell apart.
Mm.
And that's so that's an example of a country where a lot of people, it's a lovely country, and then there is some strife going on that some people feel threatened and fearful for their life. El Salvador, other countries, where on one hand, okay, it seems like it's okay, but on another hand. So we need to look more closely at what was the reason for people leaving? Were they afraid for their life? Were they on the wrong side of the political discourse that's going on? Have members of their family been kidnapped, disappeared, the desaparecidos, as they say in Spanish.
It's a scary thing.
It is a scary thing. So here in the United States, we tend to overlook what's happening in some of these other countries, that the reason people leave is that they have no
we may
hope.
not overlook, we might just not know.
Well, the same difference. I
There's
mean, we should educate ourselves. When we start saying ship people out of the country,
All right.
have you read, have you really looked into what are the reasons that people leave in the first place? Are they really law-abiding, or are they doing bad things? Many times they're not. I mean, in my experience, very few are doing anything illegal for the obvious reasons that it would draw attention to themselves, and they don't want to do that.
Do most Hispanics assimilate, or do they stay in their enclaves?
The word assimilation, I tend to use the word acculturation.
Acculturation.
Acculturation means that you are choosing to adapt to a particular situation. And assimilation, in my definition of it, assimilation means that you morph into something else. You become something that you weren't before. And for a lot of people, even for women, forget whether you're Latino or not, but even for women going into the workplace, that has been a real challenge for women. Do I assimilate into corporate America and become like my male counterparts? And one colleague of mine told this story, and she told it to a group of younger women, but she said that she worked at a big corporation. It's based here, but it's a global company based here. I won't say which company it is. This was back in the 70s when women were starting to come into their own in the workplace. And she said, I got promoted, she said, and I was reporting, there were no women in the finance department except me, and I got promoted to report to the CFO. And she said, so for my first day on my new promotion, she said, I bought a pantsuit. Now, back in the 70s, women wore pantsuits. She said, I got a pantsuit, I had on my Oxford shirt, and I had women used to have these little ties that you could buy. And I went to work for my new job with my CFO, and so when I walked in, he looked at me and he said, you don't have to dress like that. And she said, I looked at him and said, well, how am I supposed to dress? Because he did not appreciate that as a woman, now in the second highest position in the department,
He's assimilating a man.
She was trying to be what he is, a suit and so forth. And it's an example of how assimilation tends to muddy the waters in terms of, I'm here because I have something to contribute, and how do I contribute what I have in a way that feels I can be comfortable in my own skin. So I talk about acculturation. So when I say that, I worked at Harvard for a number of years, and I was one of the few women in a leadership role there, and the only Latina when I worked there in a leadership role. And you had to think about, I mean, I always thought about, how I dressed.
Okay.
First of all, there were more men than women in the school that I was in. More men than women to begin with. And I didn't want to feed into any stereotypes about the hot Latina. So I tended to dress more conservatively. Now, to me, that was a choice that I made. And it comes up when I talk to groups about how to dress, your hair, your makeup. And I said, it's really about a choice. How much do I want to adapt to my situation so that I'm taken seriously? So in that example, I want to make sure that I'm not dressing in a way that is something I would wear to go out when I'm at work. I don't want to be a distraction in terms of how I'm dressed. I want people to see me as professional. So I might take an outfit that's more conservative, but still the way I like to dress, and then proceed to do my job. So it's always a choice about how much do you adapt. And then at the same time, and I just had this conversation this week. Somebody said to me, and I won't say which company she's with, but she's not Latina, but she's an executive, and she said to me, because I gave her this example of what I just said about how to dress for work and not to be too much of the hot Latina kind of thing. And then she said to me, oh, interesting, she said, you said that. She said, in our company we have very few Latinos, and we're trying to, you know, recruit more into the associate level and up to partner and what have you. And they're in the finance industry. And she said, but what's interesting about what you just said is, she said, once we hire them, then we want them to be like us. And she said, we tell them, well, just prove yourself first before you start trying to make any change. And she said, I'll have to think about that, because we hire Latinos because we have so few, and we know that the marketplace, the consumer, is going to be increasingly Hispanic Latino. So we want to tap into that consumer market. We want to have employees that just like we have more women now. They don't have that many women either, for that matter. But she said, we're trying to hire more women. And she said, so we're trying to hire more Hispanics, with the idea being that we can be more, we can, you know, we all have blind spots, but if the more diversity you have, it'll give us a better perspective, greater insight, and so on and so forth. And she said, now that you said that, she said, we do that. We say, come in, we hire people, we think they've got what it takes, but then we want them to adapt and become like us. And we tell them, well, we don't want to see any changes right now. Wait till you prove yourself. So she said, I'll have to think about that. She says, that's an interesting point. We do it for the reasons that we want to have diversity, and then we don't want them to behave in a way that's diverse from the status quo.
Okay.
So I think we all have to ask ourselves, what is our reason for hiring diverse candidates, and what do we expect once they're hired, and how much latitude do they have to express an opinion?
Now, you started an organization called
Conexion.
Conexion.
Yeah, Conexion.
Conexion.
It's Spanish for connections, yes.
That is the Spanish for Connection.
Yeah, Conexion.
All right.
Conexion, yeah, it's the Spanish word for connections.
Okay.
And we did it because...
How come you did that?
We did that because I was very aware of the changing demographics. And I worked for Bob Putnam. He was my boss at Harvard.
Bob who?
Bob Putnam. He wrote Bowling Alone. He's very, he thinks a lot about social capital and reciprocal social networks. He was looking at democracies, what makes for strong democracies, what makes for strong communities.
And he was at Harvard.
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the things that social scientists have found is that building strong social capital, where people feel connected to each other, where they feel they have each other's back, where it's a positive network, where, you know, when I was a little girl, if you came home from school early, my mom would say, well, go over to Cotty next door. She's home. She'll give you your snack until I get home. You could depend on your neighbors. As I got older, you could depend on
Communal
friends.
spirit.
Right. The idea of your neighbors are there for each other. And then when you go into business, people mentor their people, and that's how people get ahead. Historically, the mentor relationship, formal mentoring, has been majority culture mentor to majority culture mentee. But as more women and diverse people have come into the workplace, we now are raising the possibility of a majority culture mentor to a minority or woman mentee. That hasn't gone as well because, again, what I said about being a role model, if you're a woman or you're a Latino or black and your mentor is a white male executive, what works for him isn't necessarily going to work for you. So having a mentor that understands how do we adapt so that you can be an effective employee and move up in the company requires a different level of thinking about, well, what would it take for me as a woman and as a Latina to get ahead in this organization? I can't be like the men here, so what do I need to do to advance? I mean, obviously you need to be competent in what you're doing, your job. What are the social skills? What are the behaviors, the soft skills? How do you influence if you're not a man and in an executive position? How do you become influential as a woman or as a Latina to advance in your company? So those are some of the things that the mentee and the mentor have to really look at that before they didn't have to think about, because it was mentee majority, mentee minority, or mentee majority, mentee. So the question now becomes, how do we do that? So working with Bob, and he said the thing that's really important is that we create these relationships between the mentor and the mentee. How do we help people do that? So I launched Conexion, and through my own network, the first group, I tapped into my network, which I know a lot of people, and I asked executives if they'd be willing to, it was like 12 people in the first group, would you be willing to mentor somebody in Conexion? So we have a traditional one-on-one mentoring, but I ask people who are experienced mentors to mentor a Latino professional. And in my program, there are people with 10 to 18 years of experience who are in our program. And the reason I focus on mid-career is I'm really, really concerned that corporate America, government, education, we don't have leaders in those roles now. We can't wait till we figure out for 18-year-olds to get smart and figure out how to advance. We need to go do it right now. So for people who are in their 50s and 60s, the 30 and 40-year-olds are really in the pipeline and should be in the pipeline to take their place. So I say to the mentors, that's the reason I need executives. So we have people who are CEOs, CFOs. I got a gentleman who is a retired CFO of Draper Labs to be a mentor. And the woman he's mentoring is with a different laboratory. She's an engineer. And because of his mentoring, she's been selected for this prestigious award for young scientists 35 to 45 in the country. She was one of 89. And she said to the group, this was in 2015, she said, I don't think I would have been selected had it not been for my mentor, Jim Shields, nominating me for this prestigious recognition. It was in Silicon Valley. And she was selected as one of 89 in the country. She also has gotten a promotion. He continues to mentor her, even though our program is only 1 year, but he continues to mentor her. And then this year, we nominated her for Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40, and she was selected for that as well. So you need mentors in your life to be your role model, of course, but then also to be your sounding board. You know, what do I really need to be doing to get ahead? So she's, to use her as an example, she's in a very male-dominated industry. And where she works, engineering, and it's mostly men. And so what does she need to do to advance? I mean, she's a very bright, accomplished woman, so that's a given, but so are the other people in her company. They're all bright, accomplished people. So what does she do to distinguish herself, to advance, to when there's a promotional opportunity? That was a competitive process, and there were several people on the list, and she gets selected. So what are the things, and so her mentor can be there to be a sounding board to help her think about, what do I need to do to distinguish myself, to differentiate myself? And then the last thing that we ask the mentors to do is help your mentee open up their network. And regardless of where you are, the better connected you are, the more valuable you are to your organization. So your mentor, we tell every single mentor, your job is to help your mentee grow their network, because they're younger, they're in their 30s and 40s. They may only belong to young professionals organizations, but your mentor may belong to something like Financial Executives International or the Treasurers Club or some other organization that has a slightly older demographic, and that's where you're going to make connections that are really going to be valuable to you individually and also for your company as well. So Conexion is a year-long program. And they meet once a month with their mentor for an hour and a half, and they do things like go to meetings together, like a chamber breakfast, and maybe it's a topic that the mentor thought would be good for them to hear. They might, sometimes the mentors will invite them to one of their all-hands meetings, so they can see how they run their business. They might do informational interviewing. So one gentleman, he aspires to be a COO. His mentor is a CFO. And Jeff said to me, he said, Phyllis, I don't know about IT, because the guy's an IT guy. And I said, but you know CIOs and COOs? And he said, I do. So he had his mentee interview these people that are C-suite and say, so how did you end up being a COO or a CIO? What did you have to do? So that his mentee could really think about, are there things that he could do that would really increase the likelihood that he'll end up as a chief information officer, or chief operating officer. So informational interviewing is another good thing that you can do. So we give our mentors lots of tools that they can use with their mentee.
I noticed you put out a lot of job options.
Yes. Excuse me.
How do you go about getting that information, and who is it fed to?
Well, the job postings we do are passive. We don't do active. And the reason being that if companies send people to Conexion, they don't want to think that we're shipping their people off to another company. But we do have an extensive network. Our network is probably just our database alone is around 6,000 contacts. Many of them, more than half of those, or 3/4 of those, are Hispanic Latino professionals, locally and nationally. So if you want to post your position and you want to reach into that demographic, we have people all over the country that are part of our database. So companies sign up to do their job postings through us as a way to connect with this emerging demographic. And the other thing is,
and let me understand how. And that posting goes out to how many people?
Probably close to 6,000.
Nationwide.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other thing too
That's a
is,
good database.
yes. And then in addition to that, I always tell people that our mentees have their own networks. So even like one woman, she's an engineer, and she has a group of women engineers that are her girlfriends, but she's created this network of women. So if you contact her, then you get to her, but then you get to all of her network. So in addition to the network that I have, then you have my people that are in my network that know people beyond that. So you have the multiplier effect that goes even beyond that number. But we probably are one of the better sources of older Latino professionals in the country.
Yeah. How do you measure effectiveness?
Well, we look at percentage of people who've gotten, promotions, increase in salary, started a business.
Do they come back to you with? Or how
we do a survey. We just did. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with the woman who did a survey tomorrow, so I don't have the statistics right now. But in when we did the first 3 cohorts, something like 30% within the first 12 months had already gotten a promotion within, 12 months of being in Conexion. A number of them had gotten significant salary increases, and we saw a spike in the people earning over 100,000. And the other thing that's important, 2 other things. 72% stayed in contact with their mentors, so they didn't just end when the program ended. We take a great deal of care in how we match mentees and mentors. So we do such a good job that they stay connected after the program ends, and that means that there's reciprocity, that the mentor feels value in the relationship. So we have one mentor. She actually recruited her mentee to be on her board of directors, and I saw him yesterday night at an event, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm still on their board." I said, "Oh my God. You got on the board because your mentor was the CEO there." She was looking to diversify her board, and she was looking for Hispanic Latinos. And I said, "Your mentee?" She said, "Yeah." So she nominated him. He got on. That was probably 9 years ago, and he's still on their board. And he co-chairs their gala, and they exceeded their numbers this year for 2016, so he's done a great job. And then the third thing I'll say about what we track with our mentees, we believe very, very strongly in giving back in civic engagement, and a very high percentage after they go through Conexion get involved in boards of directors. We have a new program that we launched this year with Boys and Girls Club, although we'll do it with other groups, not just Boys and Girls, but they were our pilot. I'm a trustee of Boston Boys and Girls Club. But we launched Conexion Teen Talks, and what we do is once a month, one of our Latino professionals goes to a club, talks to the teens about careers. Now the teens are diverse. They're Latino, Black, and maybe a few white at the clubs. But they're seeing the Boys and Girls Club have seen a dramatic increase in the percent of Latino kids moving into these neighborhoods. So Chelsea, Charlestown, South Boston, they're all seeing an increase in Latino kids. So I was asked to help provide Latino professionals. They said, "Phyllis, we can get white and Black professionals, but we just don't have a good connection with Latino professionals. Can you help us?" And I said, "Yes." So we started last year, 2015 to 2016. The pilot went very, very well. 80% of the kids showed up every single month to hear the speakers. And we have from different industries: banking, healthcare, engineering, cybersecurity, marketing. They were from all different professions, but they were all Latino. We had men and women, and then we did.
What's the breakdown of your men and women?
I would say roughly 50% men, 50%
50-50?
women. Yeah, it depends. Yeah, any given year, but roughly. But for the purpose of the teen talks, we alternate men and women so that the kids get to see both men, and they're from different countries. Some are U.S. born, some are from outside the U.S. So we really, really strongly encourage giving back, working with our young people, helping them stay in school. We have another program that we're doing with Eastern Bank has this financial literacy program, and they offer it in Spanish and English. So we're doing something with them and a group of young people with one of the middle schools here in the Boston area. So we're doing a lot to really facilitate getting our professionals back out there in the community.
Well, this is what this connection is all about.
Yes, it is.
That's right. And you're very happy and pleased with it.
Yes, and we hope to grow. We hope to grow outside of Boston.
Oh, what are you looking forward to?
We hope to go
What's your
national. We hope to go New York. We have, in fact, the last 3 years we've had people whose companies are located corporate here, but they work. We had people from Texas, from Florida, and this year we have a woman from Indianapolis. So we get people from outside of Massachusetts. For the group in 2017, we've already got a company signing up an employee from Connecticut who will be coming in for that. So they come in for their session. They meet their mentor. Sometimes the mentors are from outside of Massachusetts. So we're already, because honestly there is no other organization in the country that is focused on Hispanic Latino mid-careers, 30 and 40-year-old professionals.
I thought there were a number
matching them with an executive mentor. There are lots of leadership programs for Latinos, for blacks, for women, for LGBT, lots of leadership programs around the country. Here in Boston, there are a lot of leadership programs. I've actually been on the faculty of one of the other programs, the Institute for Nonprofit Management Leadership. I was on their faculty for 1 year. They were working out of Boston University. They're now affiliated with Tufts. So I've been on other programs as an instructor. But in terms of one-on-one mentoring, we're still the only program in the country that focuses on that demographic. And this will be our 12th group in 2017. And we're getting people from out of state because where they live, Texas, Florida, Indianapolis, there aren't programs like this. So they send
So where's your focus?
So we hope
Where do you want to go to?
Next, probably New York City would be the next one. Yeah,
okay.
because it's close and we can do that easily.
Very fertile ground in New York.
Yes, and we have companies who've expressed interest.
How about Miami?
That would certainly be on the list. I mean, we had a woman from Miami who was in Conexion 2 years ago.
Okay, very good. Well, I don't know what else there is that we can talk about, unless you've got some other ideas here.
No, I think that's
looks like
probably
we've
it. I think we covered the whole...
a lot of territory
yes,
here.
we did. Yes, we did.
I did want to ask you about birth rates.
Well, birth rates, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Hispanic Latino population is, we have the highest birth rate. Right now we're at 2.4, and that represents to sustain any society, you need a birth rate of 2.1. And white and black birth rates have been in decline. Their birth rates have been going down. Our birth rates is still above.
Any idea on why that's so?
There's different theories about why. They feel that's for one reason socioeconomically, that as people become more socioeconomically well off, they tend to have fewer children.
Those are the people that should be having more children.
Well, I mean, we all should be having more children.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. They
should afford them.
Yeah, they can afford the children, but for whatever reason, people choose not to. But that certainly is a contributing factor. And so right now, if you look at the population, the Hispanic Latino population is the youngest cohort. I think our median age is in the high 20s and getting lower. So the millennials, the highest percentage of millennials are Hispanic Latinos. And if you look at women of childbearing age, Hispanic Latino women are the highest percentage of women in the childbearing years. And then if you look at the population under 5, 1 in 4 of people under 5 are Hispanic Latinos. So that trend in terms of women of childbearing age is going to continue for the foreseeable future, which means that they will, and you're going to have people who are going to marry outside of their Hispanic Latino group, but they'll still be Hispanic origin, and that that happens in black communities as well. So, but they're still going to be identified as Hispanic, but they're still mixed.
Several times you said something about teaching. Let's go back and look at you. Tell me a little bit about you.
Well, my own background is, as I said, I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and then as an adult, after my dad passed away, I left Omaha and came east. I liked Boston.
Were you born in the States?
Yes, I was born in Omaha.
In Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, Omaha, Nebraska.
All right.
And then I came east, and my career was in education. I started out in education, and then when I came east, I ended up, because I was looking for a job here. I was actually living in New York at the time. I was looking for a job, and the job that I thought I was going to get was teaching in a residential facility, Little Flower Children's Services. And at the time, they said, well, we don't need you as a teacher. What we need you as a social worker, because the laws in New York had changed in the 80s to permanency, and they had a lot of Latino kids in foster care who had been in care for a long time, and so they said, well, we will train you to be an adoption social worker. Because I had done a lot of work in Omaha with families, even though I was a teacher, I had done a lot of work with immigrant families. So they thought that I had enough core competencies around working with families.
Omaha.
Yes, I did.
No, where did you teach?
In Omaha, elementary and middle and junior high school. So when I came here to the East, they thought that my skills were transferable. So then I ended up becoming an adoption social worker, which I did for a number of years in New York, and then moved to Massachusetts, did adoption work here, and then got into training and development, organizational development, and that's basically where I ended up being in human resources in a number of different companies. And then I ended up at Harvard working at the Kennedy School, as I mentioned, working for Bob Putnam at the Kennedy School.
What did you do for him?
I was his head of HR for the Kennedy School at Harvard. So that's what I did for him. And I was the first Latina assistant dean at the Kennedy School. And then I met, and of course it's the Kennedy School, and we have the Institute of Politics, and so during that time, Bill Clinton was running for president and came through to speak, and I was part of working with the advance team, and I met a woman who worked for him. She had gone to law school with the Clintons at Yale, and so I helped her do all the setup and making all the arrangements. And then a number of months later, after he got elected, the phone rang one night while I was at the office, and it was Maria, and she said, "Phyllis, it's Maria." And I said, "Oh my God, that's great, congratulations." And she said, "You want to come work for us?" And I said, "Yes." So I had to, after I hung up, I thought, "Oh my God, I'm going to have to move, I'm going to have to, I don't know anybody." But I took the risk, and I went, and I ended up being there for 5 years, from 94 to 99, and I was a deputy assistant secretary in Department of Education in the Office of Elementary, Secondary, and Bilingual Ed. So it was a great experience. I tell people, if you ever have a chance to go, go serve your country. Being a political appointee, but I did have the credentials. I was an educator and so forth.
What president? Clinton?
Clinton, Bill Clinton. Yes,
okay.
yes. So, so I was very fortunate, and then came back and started Conexion, and I'm doing what I'm doing now, and I love what I do. And
this the only thing that you do in life right now?
Right now, it's pretty much. I mean, I serve on 5 boards of directors. I'm on. I'm a trustee at. I serve on boards of directors. I'm a trustee at Eastern Bank. I'm the first Latina trustee that Eastern Bank's ever had in 200 years. I'm on the board of United Way here in Boston. I'm on the board of Boys and Girls Club here in Boston. I'm on the Jobs for the Future, which is a national foundation that focuses on workforce development and education. And I'm also a trustee at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and I also chair the Community Benefits Committee for the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
You have to attend all these meetings?
Yep. I go to a lot of meetings. But it's about making connections, and for every one of those organizations, I am one of the few or only Latino on their board. Now, when I joined every one of those boards, I was frequently the first or second Latino on that board. So it says something about these organizations that I just mentioned are all.
You pull people in as you go along?
Yes, that's the idea. The goal is to bring in more Hispanic Latinos, and I'm the start, and then I'm on nominating committee for every one of those boards. So for Eastern Bank, for Boys and Girls Club, for United Way, for Jobs for the Future, I'm on nominating committee for all of those organizations because they want to bring in more Hispanic Latinos. So if any of your viewers are interested in Conexion, and we start a next class in February, they can certainly contact me. And certainly if you're Hispanic Latino, I mean, certainly I'm a connector. So if they're interested in any of those boards or interested in Conexion, certainly, getting a hold of me, I'd be happy to tell them more about what we do. But I'm very proud of our accomplishments so far, and hopefully continue to keep America great.
Well, this has been very informative.
Okay.
And I appreciate your coming.
Sure.
And, let's see, what else we got down here?
I think that's probably, that's good. It's been an
covered,
hour.
You covered the whole thing.
Yeah.
The 1 in 6 people in the U.S. is of Hispanic origin. Is that true?
Yep.
1 of every 6?
Yeah.
Okay. And
under 18, it's 1 in 4.
2010, the percentage of U.S. population that is white is not Hispanic. With what?
No, that slide is what I was saying. one of the questions people ask me is, so of the 17 million Hispanic children in the country, what percentage are native born? And that 91% are native born. People don't know that. So.
And when you write your history, is that you?
No, that's my dad.
That's your dad?
That's my dad, yeah.
Yeah, where's your dad right
That
here?
little boy on the chair.
Right there?
Yeah.
He was a kid then?
Yep, he was 8 years old.
Okay, but why didn't you put yourself on the cover here?
Because it goes back to my grandmother. They left Mexico, came to the United States, and to make a better life, and they endured a lot of hardship to do that. And my dad was a young man; he was in his 20s when they came, and he wanted to go back, but his mother said, "No, we worked too hard to get here." So they stuck it out, and he became a successful businessman and sponsored lots of people to Omaha.
That's good.
From Mexico. So.
Okay. Well, Phyllis. Thank you for coming.
Sure, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, and I want to thank my audience for listening in. You're looking at the Learning Tree, and you've just heard a marvelous dissertation on Hispanic heritage by Phyllis
Barajas.
Barajas. Someday I'll get that right too.
Okay.
I am Richard S. McGee, and you are watching the Learning Tree. Good afternoon. Thank you.